Hi, Tracy Hugelmeyer here with VintagepreneurUniversity.com, where I help vintage sellers start, grow, and scale their business on Etsy. I also own my own shop on Etsy, Rustic Eye, my vintage shop since 2013. And today I'm going to talk to you about a question that I've been getting asked a lot lately, and that is, should I put the word vintage in my tags and titles? So like everything else, it's up to you to make that decision for your business. I do choose to include the word vintage in most of, if not all of my titles for my vintage items on Etsy. And I'm going to share the reasons why with you so that you can come to your own conclusions about whether you want to do this or not. And I should also add that if you aren't including vintage in your titles and tags right now, and then you decide to try it, you never want to change everything at once. So, experiment and see what works for you if you do decide to make this change, or one way or the other, whether you remove them or you put them in. So whenever you're thinking about your titles and tags, understand that that is part of your SEO, your search engine optimization. And if that is Greek to you, or if you don't feel like you have a good handle on it, I have a free training on search engine optimization, and I'll link to that in the notes for you so that you can check that out if you want to. But understand with search engine optimization, whenever you're talking about your titles, your tags, or anything that you're doing in your shop really at all, you have to remember that there is Etsy, there's the Etsy SEO or the Etsy algorithm, and there's everything outside of Etsy, so your Google and your Yahoo and all those other search engines, and they're different. So it's important to consider both when you're thinking about what you want to do with your search engine optimization. And when we're talking about titles, we are definitely talking about search engine optimization. So let's take Etsy first. I'm going to go ahead and jump behind the camera so I can show you a few things. All right, so what I've done is I've opened up an incognito window, which just hopefully gives us a little bit more, makes us a little bit more anonymous. If you're using Chrome, if you don't know how to do that, you just click on the little three dots in the right corner here, and there it is, new incognito window. And then most likely Etsy's still tracking our IP address, so they still know it's us, but maybe we can be a little bit more anonymous and get some results that aren't specific to us and our search history. So let's explore a little bit what it looks like to use the word vintage or not use the word vintage when we're searching in Etsy. So right now we're talking about the Etsy algorithm, our Etsy SEO, okay? I'm going to use one of my categories, which is vintage rubber stamps. If I type in vintage rubber stamps into the search bar, you can see right away that it cuts out the vintage. It takes it right out. And here it says, showing rubber stamps in vintage. Well, what does that mean? Vintage is a category that is automatically assigned to your listings if it's not handmade. So let me show you that really quick. I've jumped over to my shop manager in the listings, like I'm going to add a new listing so I can show you what this looks like. Right here where it says about this listing, who made it. If you say I did or a member of my shop, then it's automatically going to tag you as a handmade, this item as a handmade item. But if you say another company or person, and then select whatever it is, here, if you select anything in this category, the vintage category, you're tagged with vintage automatically. Let me show you. If you type recently, it's going to keep you in that handmade category. See right here, handmade with production assistance. Or if you say made to order, you're still showing in handmade. But if you click on vintage, then it ticks you over to the vintage category. So as soon as you pick a year under that vintage category, you're tagged as vintage. Because of that, when it comes to Etsy SEO, if you do not have the word vintage in your titles and tags, but you have selected a year under that vintage category and you're not marked as handmade, then you will show up if somebody types for a vintage item if they use that word, and you theoretically do not need to use the word vintage. So let me see if I can find one of my items. So this is mine, but it's an ad. I'm going to keep going because I want to find one of my organic items. Over to page 2. And this is mine, also an ad though. And let's see. Okay, here is my item. Now you can see I use the word vintage here right away. So you might be wondering, after I just told you what I told you, why do I do that? There is a possibility that using the word vintage in your titles and tags, if you have a larger competition on a particular item or category, will help you appear as more relevant in a search and could help your SEO, although that's speculation. What I do like about using the word vintage from an Etsy perspective in my titles is it shows the browser or buyer right away that this is a vintage item, and it could serve as showing more of a value for that particular item because it is vintage. All right, so let's switch over to your outside SEO. So now we're talking about any searches that anyone does not on Etsy. So for instance, Google, where I'm at now to show you, or Bing, or Yahoo, or even Pinterest. If somebody searches for your item, let's use the same search phrase, vintage rubber stamps, just as an example. Now I'm over in the shopping tab, and you can see that a lot of these listings are from Etsy, which is great. And just a little side note, if you didn't know, Etsy does advertise on our behalf on Google, even if we're not paying for Google shopping ads or Google ads through Etsy. So it's kind of a nice thing that they do with the dollars that we give them. And it's definitely possible that they're taking that vintage category and pushing it over to Google when in the ad, but or Google's picking that up on their end. However, to be the most relevant, chances are you're going to need the vintage word in your titles, and it doesn't hurt to have them in your tags either. The way I look at this subject overall is it can help you be more relevant to use the word vintage, and it doesn't hurt anything. Unless you're taking up space, you know, you have some more valuable keywords that you want to use, then you might want to use those instead. But otherwise, throw a vintage in there. It's not going to hurt you. But play around with it. See what works for you, because there are a lot of other factors. As always, what's your competition? Is somebody more likely to search for your thing using mid-century than vintage? Things like that. So maybe mid-century is the best keyword for you over vintage. But again, that's something that you need to look at for what you specifically offer, what your competition is, and what works best for your business. But hopefully this helps to give you a basis for making that decision. All right, that wraps up today's little discussion about if you should use the word vintage in your tags and titles or not. Bottom line is it's up to you and your business. And if you are struggling with SEO and understanding that concept, or if you want to get a deeper understanding, then check out my free SEO challenge. I'm linking to that in the notes. Thanks for joining me and have a great day.